Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his modified hoverbike across the purple plains of Kepler 442b. The dual suns beat down on his weathered face, and his cowboy hat provided the only shade for miles around. 3 years he'd been working this alien frontier, herding the local cattle-like creatures called thorn beasts for the colonial settlers. It wasn't much different from his old job back on Earth's Montana ranges, except here the grass was purple and the sky showed 2 suns instead of 1. His comlink crackled with static. "Jake, you out there?" came the voice of Sarah Chen, the settlement's coordinator. "Yeah, Sarah. What's the situation?" "We've got reports of strange energy readings about 15 clicks northwest of your position. Could be nothing. But with those Vorthan hunting ships spotted in the system last week, we can't take chances." Jake's jaw tightened. The Vorthans were bad news. Alien poachers who traveled between star systems hunting rare creatures for wealthy collectors across the galaxy. They had no regard for local laws or endangered species protection. "I'll check it out," Jake replied, turning his hoverbike toward the coordinates Sarah transmitted. The landscape changed as he rode northwest. The purple grasslands gave way to rocky outcroppings and strange crystalline formations that jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. His bike's sensors started picking up unusual electromagnetic signatures. Something was definitely out here. A sound made him stop. It wasn't like anything he'd heard on this world before. A high-pitched whimpering, almost like crying. Jake dismounted and activated his bike's stealth mode, causing it to blend with the surrounding rocks. He pulled out his plasma rifle and moved carefully toward the source of the sound. Behind a cluster of crystal spires, Jake found something that made him forget how to breathe. 3 creatures lay in what appeared to be a hastily constructed nest. They were about the size of large dogs, covered in scales that shimmered between deep blue and silver. Their wings were folded against their bodies, and their long necks ended in distinctly dragon-like heads. But what struck Jake most was their eyes, intelligent, frightened, and unmistakably young. Baby dragons. Actual baby dragons. One of them looked up at Jake and made that whimpering sound again. Jake had seen enough Earth animals to recognize distress when he heard it. These little ones were scared, hungry, and alone. "Where's your mama, little ones?" Jake whispered, kneeling down slowly. His question was answered by a roar that echoed across the landscape. Jake spun around to see something that made his blood run cold. A massive Vorthon hunting ship was descending from the clouds, its dark hull bristling with capture equipment and weapons. The ship was easily 3 times the size of the colonial settlement's buildings, designed for one purpose: taking whatever the Vorthans wanted. The babies heard the ship too and huddled together, their whimpering becoming more desperate. Jake realized with growing horror what had happened. The adult dragons, probably the babies' parents, had already been captured. These little ones had been left behind, either because they were too small to be valuable or because the hunters planned to come back for them. The ship touched down about 200 meters away. Jake watched through his rifle's scope as a boarding ramp lowered and 6 Vorthon hunters emerged. They were tall, insect-like beings with 4 arms and hard shells covering their bodies. Each carried sophisticated capture equipment, neural stunners, containment fields, and tracking devices. One of them, wearing more ornate armor than the others, pointed toward the crystal formations where Jake and the babies were hiding. They had detected the young dragon's heat signatures. Jake had maybe 3 minutes before the hunters reached their position. His mind raced through options. He couldn't fight 6 armed Vorthans with just his plasma rifle. Running wasn't an option either. His hoverbike couldn't outrun a hunting ship. But Jake Morrison hadn't survived 3 years on an alien frontier by giving up when things got tough. He looked down at the baby dragons. The largest one, with slightly more silver in its scales than the others, was looking right at him. There was something in its eyes that reminded Jake of the young colts he used to work with back on Earth. Trust, hope, and a desperate need for protection. "All right, little ones," Jake whispered. "Time to see if this old cowboy still has some tricks left." Jake quickly activated his comlink and sent an emergency signal to the settlement, then switched it to silent mode. He couldn't risk the sound giving away their position. Next, he pulled out his emergency shelter, a compact device that would create a small but strong energy barrier. It wouldn't stop the Vorthons for long, but it might buy him some time. The baby dragons seemed to understand that Jake was trying to help them. The largest one, Jake decided to call him Silver, actually nuzzled against Jake's hand. The touch sent a strange tingle up Jake's arm, like a mild electrical current. The Vorthons were getting closer. Jake could hear their clicking language and the whir of their scanning equipment. He made a decision that would change everything. Jake scooped up Silver in his arms, surprised by how light the baby dragon was despite its size. The other two babies immediately moved closer, as if Jake had become their protector by touching their sibling. Jake activated the emergency shelter, and a shimmering energy dome appeared around them. "Contact," one of the Vorthans said in accented Galactic Standard. "3 juvenile specimens detected. Activating containment protocol." Jake felt Silver tense in his arms. The baby dragon's scales began to glow with a faint blue light. The other two babies started glowing too, their scales shifting colors rapidly. That's when Jake discovered something amazing. The dragons weren't just scared, they were angry, and apparently even baby dragons had some serious defensive capabilities. Silver opened his small mouth and let out what could only be described as a roar. It wasn't very loud, but it came with a burst of energy that made Jake's hair stand on end. The other babies joined in, and suddenly the air around them was crackling with electricity. The Vorthons had reached the energy barrier and were setting up their equipment to breach it. But when the baby dragons roared together, something unexpected happened. The energy barrier didn't just hold, it expanded, pushing back against the alien hunters. "Impossible," the lead Vorthon clicked. "Juveniles shouldn't have developed breath abilities yet." Jake grinned. These weren't ordinary dragons, and this wasn't going to be an ordinary rescue. The barrier held for 30 seconds before the Vorthon's equipment started breaking through it. Jake knew they had one chance. He whispered to Silver, "Can you and your siblings fly yet?" Silver looked up at Jake with those intelligent eyes and made a sound that somehow Jake understood as a little. "Good enough," Jake said. "When I give the signal, we run for my bike. Think you can keep up?" Silver's response was to spread his small wings. They were beautiful, like stained glass windows that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. The other babies spread their wings too. The barrier failed. "Now!" Jake shouted. He burst out of the crystal formation running at full speed, with 3 baby dragons flying awkwardly beside him. The Vorthons shouted in surprise and immediately gave chase. Neural stunners fired blue bolts of energy past Jake's head as he zigzagged between rock formations. Silver suddenly veered off course, flying directly at one of the pursuing Vorthans. The alien raised his weapon, but Silver breathed out another burst of energy. This time it was stronger, creating a small electromagnetic pulse that short-circuited the hunter's equipment. The Vorthon stumbled and fell, his gear sparking and smoking. "The juveniles are more developed than estimated," the lead hunter said into his communicator. "Request backup protocols." Jake reached his hoverbike and quickly disabled the stealth mode. The 3 baby dragons landed nearby, their small chests heaving from the effort of flying. Jake could see they were exhausted. "Come on, little ones, time to go." But the Vorthans had anticipated this. Their ship rose into the air and moved to intercept Jake's escape route. Weapon systems powered up with an ominous humming sound. Jake was trapped between armed hunters on the ground and a hunting ship in the air. Any normal human would have given up. But Jake Morrison had been dealing with impossible situations his whole life, from breaking wild horses to surviving sandstorms on alien planets. He noticed that Silver was looking at something behind the Vorthons. Jake followed the baby dragon's gaze and saw it. A narrow canyon cutting between two large rock formations. It would be a tight fit for his hoverbike, but the hunting ship wouldn't be able to follow. "Silver," Jake said quietly, "think you and your siblings can make it through that canyon?" Silver looked at the narrow passage, then back at Jake. The baby dragon's scales flickered between blue and silver, and Jake somehow understood that this meant yes, but barely. "That's all I need," Jake said. "Let's show these poachers what happens when they mess with our family." Jake gunned his hoverbike toward the canyon. The baby dragons took off beside him, their wings working hard to keep up. Behind them, the Vorthons opened fire with everything they had. The ground exploded in plasma bursts and energy bolts, but Jake kept weaving and dodging with the skill that had kept him alive through 3 years of frontier dangers. They reached the canyon entrance just as the hunting ship fired its main weapon. The blast missed them by inches, striking the rock wall and sending debris raining down. Jake and the dragons plunged into the narrow passage, scraping walls and dodging falling stones. The canyon was like flying through a maze. Jake had to trust his instincts and the baby dragon's guidance to navigate the twisting passages. Silver flew just ahead of him, somehow knowing which turns to take. The other babies flanked Jake's bike, their scales glowing brighter whenever they sensed danger. Behind them, Jake could hear the frustration in the Vorthons' clicking language as their ship proved too large to follow, but he knew they wouldn't give up easily. They would find another way around, and when they did, Jake needed to be ready. The canyon opened onto a vast underground cavern that Jake had never seen before. Bioluminescent plants covered the walls, casting everything in an eerie blue-green light. In the center of the cavern was a pool of water so clear it looked like liquid crystal. The baby dragons immediately flew to the water and began drinking eagerly. Jake dismounted and knelt beside the pool, cupping the water in his hands. It was the cleanest, coldest water he'd ever tasted. Silver came over and sat beside Jake, no longer afraid. The baby dragon's scales had stopped flickering and settled into a warm, silver-blue pattern. Jake reached out slowly and touched Silver's head. The baby dragon leaned into the touch, making a sound like a cat's purr. "We make a pretty good team," Jake said softly. "But this isn't over. Those hunters aren't going to stop until they get what they came for." As if to prove his point, Jake's comlink crackled with an incoming transmission, but it wasn't from Sarah at the settlement. The voice that came through spoke in the harsh, clicking accent of the Vorthans. "Human," the voice said, "we know you have taken our specimens. Return them now, and we will allow you to live." Jake looked at the 3 baby dragons, now playing together near the water's edge. They trusted him. They depended on him. And somewhere out there, their parents were probably caged in the Vorthon's ship. Jake picked up his comlink. "This is Jake Morrison. I don't know what kind of specimens you're talking about, but if you're referring to the 3 baby dragons in my care, you can go straight to whatever passes for hell in your part of the galaxy." There was a pause. Then the Vorthon spoke again, and this time there was genuine surprise in his voice. "You would protect creatures that are not of your species? This makes no logical sense." "Maybe not to you," Jake replied. "But where I come from, we don't let bullies pick on kids. Doesn't matter if they're human kids or dragon kids." Another pause. "You have made a significant error in judgment, human. We will retrieve our specimens. And when we do, you will discover that there are consequences for interfering with Vorthon operations." The transmission cut off. Jake looked around the cavern. It was a good defensive position, but it was also a trap. The Vorthans would find the other entrance eventually, and when they did, Jake and the dragons would be cornered. But as Jake watched Silver and the other babies playing by the water, he realized something important. These weren't just any baby dragons. The way they had coordinated their energy bursts, the way Silver seemed to understand exactly what Jake was thinking, the way they had navigated the canyon together. This wasn't normal animal behavior. These dragons were intelligent, maybe more intelligent than anyone realized. Silver suddenly stopped playing and looked directly at Jake. The baby dragon's eyes held a depth that made Jake's breath catch. Then Silver did something impossible. He spoke, not with words, but somehow Jake heard Silver's voice in his mind. As clear as if the dragon had spoken aloud. "Thank you for protecting us, Jake Morrison. But the hunters are not the greatest danger we face. There is something much worse coming. Something that wants to use us to hurt many people." Jake stared at Silver in amazement. "You can talk? I mean think talk?" Silver's mental voice carried a mixture of ancient wisdom and childlike innocence. "All dragons can mind speak with those they trust. But we are not just any dragons. We are the last children of the Crystal Queen, and there are those who would use our power to destroy entire worlds." Before Jake could fully process this revelation, his bike's proximity sensors started screaming warnings. The Vorthons had found another way into the cavern, and they weren't coming alone. The real adventure was just beginning. Jake's proximity sensors weren't just detecting the Vorthons anymore. Something much larger was approaching the cavern system from above. Through his bike's scanner display, Jake could see the outline of a massive ship, easily 10 times bigger than the hunting vessel. This wasn't just a poaching operation anymore. Silver pressed against Jake's leg, and suddenly Jake's mind filled with images that weren't his own. He saw vast fleets of warships, planets stripped of all life, and billions of creatures in cages. At the center of it all was a being of pure darkness that seemed to feed on the suffering of others. "The Devourer," Silver's mental voice whispered with terror. "He collects the most powerful beings in the galaxy and uses their life force to fuel his armies. The hunters were just supposed to find us and report back." Jake felt sick. "Your parents?" "Taken 3 days ago. They tried to hide us, but the hunters' technology is very advanced." The mental voice of another baby dragon joined the conversation, one of Silver's siblings. "I am Spark. My other sister is called Shimmer. We have been waiting for someone brave enough to help us." Shimmer, the smallest of the three, added her own voice to the mental link. "The Devourer seeks us because we are young. Young crystal dragons can channel pure energy without being corrupted by dark emotions. He wants to turn us into weapons." Jake's jaw clenched. In his 3 years on this frontier world, he'd seen plenty of bullies, claim jumpers, wildlife poachers, corrupt officials, but this was something else entirely. This was evil on a scale that made his head spin. "Well," Jake said aloud, checking his plasma rifle's charge, "he's going to have to get through one very stubborn cowboy first." The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder. Jake could see lights moving through the cavern tunnels. The Vorthons had brought vehicles designed for underground pursuit. But there was something else. His bike's sensors detected energy signatures that didn't match Vorthon technology. Silver's eyes widened. "Dark soldiers. The Devourer has sent his personal troops." Jake had heard whispers about the dark soldiers in spacer bars across the frontier. They were said to be beings from a dozen different species, all converted into mindless servants of the Devourer through technology that stripped away free will. They felt no fear, no pain, and no mercy. "How many?" Jake asked. Spark tilted his head, listening to something Jake couldn't hear. 12 dark soldiers, 6 Vorthon hunters, and something else, something that used to be a dragon. That hit Jake like a physical blow. "They turned one of your kind?" "My uncle," Shimmer said softly. "Taken when I was just hatched. He fought them for so long, but the Devourer's corruption is very strong." Jake looked around the cavern. the bioluminescent plants, the crystal-clear pool, the narrow passages. His mind began working the way it had when he used to track rustlers through the Montana Badlands. Every defensive position had weaknesses, but it also had advantages for someone who knew how to use them. "Listen up, little ones," Jake said, his voice taking on the calm authority he used to use when training young horses. "I need to know exactly what you can do. Not what adult dragons can do, what you three can do right now." Silver straightened up. "We can breathe energy bolts, but only small ones. We can fly for about 10 minutes before getting tired, and we can mind speak with each other and with you. We can also sense emotions," Spark added. "Fear, anger, sadness. We feel what others feel. And I can make small illusions," Shimmer said shyly. "Just for a few seconds, but they look very real." Jake smiled grimly. "That's more than enough. Here's what we're going to do." Over the next 5 minutes, Jake outlined his plan. It was crazy, dangerous, and relied on perfect timing between a human and 3 baby aliens who had never worked together before. In other words, it was exactly the kind of plan that Jake had built his reputation on. The first Vorthan vehicle emerged from one of the tunnel entrances just as Jake finished his explanation. It was a sleek, spider-like craft designed for navigating tight spaces. Its pilot was scanning the cavern with hunting sensors, looking for heat signatures. Jake activated his bike's stealth mode again and slipped behind a cluster of glowing plants. The baby dragons took their positions as planned. To anyone watching, the cavern appeared empty, except for the natural features. The Vorthan pilot spoke into his communicator. "Cavern Delta 7 appears unoccupied. Expanding search pattern." That's when Shimmer's illusion kicked in. Suddenly, the pilot's scanner showed 3 heat signatures moving toward the far end of the cavern. The Vorthan immediately piloted his craft in that direction, speeding past Jake's hiding place. As the vehicle passed overhead, Silver and Spark rose from their concealment and fired coordinated energy bolts at the craft's rear engine. The shots weren't powerful enough to destroy it, but they were precisely aimed at the fuel coupling Jake had identified through his rifle's scope. The vehicle crashed into the cavern wall in a shower of sparks and smoke. The Vorthan pilot stumbled out, dazed but alive. Jake was already moving. He emerged from stealth mode directly behind the hunter and pressed his plasma rifle to the alien's shell-like back. "Don't move and don't call for backup." The Vorthan clicked angrily. "You cannot stop what comes, human. The Dark Soldiers will not be deterred by your primitive tactics." "Maybe not," Jake said. "But they're going to have to work for it." He used the Vorthan's own restraint cables to tie the alien to his crashed vehicle, then stripped the hunter of his communication equipment and weapons. The advanced Vorthan gear would come in handy. The baby dragons regrouped around Jake. All 3 were breathing hard from the effort of their coordinated attack, but their eyes shone with excitement. "That was amazing," Spark said through the mental link. "We have never worked with a human before. Your mind thinks in such interesting patterns." "Different species, same goal," Jake replied. "Now comes the hard part." Jake's stolen Vorthan scanner was picking up more movement in the tunnels. The Dark Soldiers were taking a different approach than the hunters. Instead of rushing in, they were systematically sealing off every exit from the cavern system. They intended to trap their prey and then close in slowly. But they had made one mistake. They assumed they were hunting a normal human and 3 helpless baby dragons. They had no idea they were dealing with Jake Morrison, a man who had once tracked a wounded grizzly bear through a blizzard for 3 days straight, just to make sure it didn't suffer. "Silver, I need you to show me the mental image of your uncle, the dragon they corrupted." Silver's scales dimmed as he shared the painful memory. Jake saw a magnificent crystal dragon with scales like flowing mercury, but his eyes had been replaced with mechanical implants that glowed with dark energy. Cables and devices were grafted directly into his flesh. It was a horrific violation of a noble creature. His name was Mercury, Silver whispered. He used to tell us stories about the old days when crystal dragons flew freely through the stars. Jake felt anger building in his chest, not the hot, explosive anger that made people stupid, but the cold, focused anger that had helped him survive every challenge the frontier had thrown at him. "We're going to free him," Jake said quietly. "That's impossible," Spark protested. "The corruption technology cannot be reversed." "Maybe not the technology," Jake said, "but I've been working with traumatized animals my whole life. Sometimes what they need isn't a cure. They need to remember who they used to be." Jake began implementing the second part of his plan, using the Vorthan equipment he'd captured. He started broadcasting on the frequency the Dark Soldiers were using to coordinate their search. But instead of words, he transmitted something else. The sound of Silver, Spark, and Shimmer singing together. Dragons, it turned out, had their own form of music. It wasn't like human music at all. It was pure emotion translated into sound. Joy, love, hope, and freedom all woven together into something that made Jake's heart ache with its beauty. The effect on the approaching enemies was immediate. Jake watched through his scanner as the Dark Soldiers' advance faltered. Their electronic coordination was being disrupted by the dragon's song, which operated on frequencies their technology couldn't filter out. But more importantly, somewhere in the tunnel system, a corrupted crystal dragon named Mercury heard his nephew and nieces singing the old songs, and for the first time in months, something stirred in the depths of his mechanical prison. The response came as a roar that shook the entire cavern system. But this wasn't the mindless rage of a corrupted creature. It was the fury of someone remembering what had been taken from them. Jake grinned. "Phase 2, kids. Time to go wake up your uncle." But as they prepared to move deeper into the tunnel system, Jake's scanner detected something that made his blood run cold. The massive ship above wasn't just observing anymore. It was beginning to descend toward the planet's surface. "The Devourer's personal command ship," Shimmer whispered in terror. "He has come to collect us himself." Jake checked his plasma rifle and looked at the 3 brave baby dragons who had placed their complete trust in him. Somewhere ahead, a corrupted dragon was breaking free from his mental chains. Behind them, Dark Soldiers were regrouping for another assault. Above them, one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy was landing with an entire army. Any reasonable person would surrender. Any sane person would look for a way to escape. But Jake Morrison had never been entirely reasonable or sane, and he'd be damned if he was going to let some cosmic bully hurt these kids on his watch. "All right, team," Jake said, shouldering his rifle and mounting his hoverbike. "Let's go remind the universe why you don't mess with Earth cowboys or their families." As they rode deeper into the tunnels, with Silver flying alongside the bike and Spark and Shimmer flanking them, Jake couldn't help but smile. 3 years ago, he'd come to this world thinking he was just going to herd alien cattle for a living. Instead, he'd found himself preparing to take on an intergalactic tyrant with 3 baby dragons and a stubborn refusal to back down from a fight. It was, he decided, exactly the kind of impossible situation that made life interesting. Behind them, the sound of Mercury's roaring grew stronger, and Jake began to understand that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe wasn't an army or a weapon. It was someone who refused to give up on doing what was right. The tunnel ahead forked into 3 passages. Jake's scanner showed Dark Soldiers approaching from 2 of them. The 3rd passage led toward Mercury's position, but it also led directly toward where the Devourer's ship was landing. "Shimmer," Jake said, "how good are your illusions?" "I can make us look like Dark Soldiers for maybe 30 seconds, she replied nervously. "That'll do. Silver, Spark, when we reach your uncle, I need you 2 to keep singing no matter what happens. Don't stop unless I tell you to." "What are you going to do?" Silver asked. Jake's eyes were hard as flint as he guided the bike toward the 3rd tunnel. "Something your uncle taught me a long time ago before I ever met any of you." "But you have never met Mercury," Spark said, confused. "No," Jake replied, "but every broken thing I've ever helped heal taught me the same lesson. Sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to remind them that they used to be heroes." As they rode toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of an entire star system, Jake Morrison smiled the cold smile of a man who had finally found a fight worth everything he had to give. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber that looked like it had been carved by some ancient civilization. Crystalline pillars stretched up into darkness, and the walls were covered with symbols that seemed to glow with their own inner light. In the center of the chamber, chained to a massive dark metal construct, was Mercury. Jake had seen broken animals before, but nothing had prepared him for this. The magnificent crystal dragon Silver had shown him in memory was barely recognizable. Dark cables snaked through Mercury's scales. Mechanical implants covered half his face, and his beautiful silver wings were held spread by metal brackets that sparked with electrical current. His eyes, once warm and intelligent, now glowed with the cold light of the Devourer's technology. But as Silver, Spark, and Shimmer began to sing, something changed. Mercury's head lifted slightly, and for just a moment, the mechanical glow in his eyes flickered. "Uncle Mercury," Silver called out through their mental link, "we have come to take you home." Mercury's response was a roar that shook dust from the chamber ceiling. But Jake, who had spent years learning to read animal behavior, heard something in that roar that the Dark Soldiers probably missed. Pain, confusion, and deep down, underneath all the mechanical corruption, a desperate plea for help. Jake dismounted his bike and walked slowly toward the chained dragon. Behind him, he could hear the Dark Soldiers entering the chamber, but he kept his focus on Mercury. "Easy there, big fellow," Jake said in the same calm voice he'd used with spooked horses. "I know you're hurting. I know they did terrible things to you, but your family is here now." Mercury's mechanical eyes focused on Jake with laser intensity. When the corrupted dragon spoke, his voice was a horrible mixture of his original melodic tones and harsh electronic static. "Human, you should not be here. The Devourer comes." "Yeah, I figured as much," Jake replied, still walking slowly forward. "But see, I've got a problem with bullies who hurt kids and their families. Always have." Jake was now close enough to see the individual components of Mercury's restraint system. His engineering background from maintaining ranch equipment back on Earth was coming in handy. The principles were the same, just more advanced. Every system had a weakness, and every machine could be broken if you knew where to hit it. "The corruption cannot be reversed," Mercury said, but Jake noticed that his voice was becoming slightly more natural as his nieces and nephew continued their song. "Maybe not," Jake said, pulling out a cutting tool he'd taken from the Vorthan hunter. "But sometimes you don't need to fix something completely to set it free." That's when the Dark Soldiers opened fire. Jake dove behind one of the crystal pillars as energy bolts lit up the chamber. But instead of trying to capture the baby dragons, the Dark Soldiers were aiming to kill. Their orders had changed. "Jake!" Silver's mental voice was filled with panic. "Something is wrong. The Dark Soldiers never use lethal force when collecting specimens." Jake understood immediately. The Devourer wasn't planning to capture the young dragons anymore. He had decided to eliminate them rather than risk losing control of them. Which meant the chamber filled with a presence so dark and oppressive that Jake felt his knees buckle. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant, and every bioluminescent surface in the chamber began to dim. The Devourer had arrived. The entity that materialized in the center of the chamber was not what Jake had expected. Instead of some monstrous alien form, the Devourer appeared almost human, tall, elegant, dressed in flowing robes that seemed to absorb light. Only his eyes revealed his true nature, They were windows into an endless void that had consumed countless worlds. "So," the devourer said in a voice like silk wrapped around broken glass, "this is the primitive human who thinks he can interfere with forces beyond his comprehension." Jake stepped out from behind the pillar, plasma rifle ready. "Name's Jake Morrison, and yeah, I'm primitive. I'm also stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery when someone threatens kids." The devourer laughed, and the sound made cracks appear in the chamber walls. "You amuse me, human. Tell me, do you truly believe your simple weapons can harm a being who has devoured the life force of entire civilizations?" "Don't know," Jake replied honestly. "But I figure we'll find out." Jake fired his plasma rifle directly at the devourer. The energy bolt struck the alien entity and simply disappeared, absorbed into the dark robes without any visible effect. "Pathetic," the devourer said. "Now watch as I demonstrate what real power looks like." The devourer raised his hand, and dark energy began flowing from his fingers toward the baby dragons. Silver, Spark, and Shimmer tried to fly away, but the energy formed tendrils that wrapped around them like chains. Jake watched in horror as their bright scales began to dim. That's when Mercury did something no one expected. The corrupted dragon broke free from his restraints. The sound of snapping metal filled the chamber as Mercury tore through the cables and brackets that had held him. The mechanical implants sparked and smoked as his body rejected the devourer's technology. His eyes flickered between mechanical red and natural silver. "You will not touch them," Mercury roared, and this time his voice was completely his own. The devourer turned toward Mercury with mild interest. "Ah, my pet dragon remembers his original programming. How quaint. But you forget, creature, you are mine. You cannot resist my commands." "Maybe he can't," Jake said, pulling out something the devourer hadn't noticed before, a small device he'd cobbled together from the Vorthan equipment. "But he's not fighting alone anymore." Jake activated the device. It was crude by galactic standards, basically just a signal amplifier connected to his bike's power source. But it took the baby dragon's song and broadcast it at a frequency that resonated through Mercury's mechanical implants. The effect was immediate. Mercury's eyes blazed with silver fire as his original personality fought to break through the corruption. But more importantly, the amplified song began affecting every piece of the devourer's technology in the chamber. "Impossible," the devourer snarled as his dark soldiers began stumbling and clutching their heads. "Crystal dragon frequencies cannot penetrate my neural control systems." "Maybe not," Jake said, making adjustments to his device. "But crystal dragon frequencies amplified by human engineering and powered by pure stubbornness? That's something new." Jake had realized something important during his time on the frontier. Every species in the galaxy had their own strengths. But humans had something unique, the ability to take other beings' abilities and combine them in ways no one had thought of before. It wasn't just tool use. It was collaborative innovation on an instinctive level. The baby dragons understood what Jake was trying to do. They flew closer to his amplifier and sang louder, their voices harmonizing in ways that made the chamber walls ring like bells. The frequency was disrupting the devourer's control over his servants, but it was also doing something else. Mercury began to remember who he used to be. Images flashed through the mental link that now connected all 5 of them. Mercury teaching Silver to fly, telling stories about the old days, protecting his family from danger. The mechanical corruption couldn't stand against the power of those memories amplified by love and determination. "Uncle!" Silver called out joyfully as Mercury's eyes cleared completely. Mercury looked down at his nieces and nephew, then at Jake. When he spoke, his voice was pure crystal music. "Thank you, Jake Morrison of Earth. You have given me back myself." The devourer's expression changed from confidence to something approaching concern. This changes nothing. I have consumed entire species. One corrupted dragon and a handful of juveniles cannot stand against me. You're right, Jake said, stepping forward. But you're forgetting something important. And what is that? Jake smiled the grin that had gotten him into and out of trouble his entire life. We're not fighting you alone either. That's when Sarah Chen's voice crackled through Jake's comlink. Jake, this is colony control. Cavalry's arriving in 30 seconds. The chamber shook as military spacecraft screamed overhead. Jake's emergency signal had reached not just the colony, but the Terran Federation patrol fleet that happened to be in the next system over. And apparently, they had some very definite opinions about entities who threatened human colonies and endangered species. But the real surprise came when Mercury stood to his full height and spread his newly freed wings. "Devourer," the crystal dragon said in a voice that echoed with ancient power. "You made one critical error in your calculations." "And what is that?" the Devourer demanded. "You assumed I was just another dragon you had corrupted." Mercury's scales began to glow with silver fire. "But I am Mercury, the Stormcaller, last son of the Crystal Throne. And these children are under my protection." The Devourer's eyes widened slightly. "The Crystal Throne fell 1,000 years ago." "The throne fell," Mercury agreed. "But the bloodline endures, and we have learned much about cooperation from our new human friends." That's when Jake understood what Mercury was asking. The dragon wasn't just requesting help, he was offering to combine their abilities in a way that had never been attempted before. Human ingenuity and determination focused through crystal dragon power amplification. "Silver Spark Shimmer," Jake called out. "Channel everything you've got through Mercury's storm calling. I'll provide the targeting and tactical coordination." "This is impossible," the Devourer said, but for the first time Jake heard uncertainty in his voice. "No species has ever successfully merged their abilities at this level." "Yeah, well," Jake said, linking his mind fully with the four dragons, "you've never dealt with humans before." The mental connection was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Suddenly, he could see the chamber from 5 different perspectives simultaneously, could feel the emotional resonance of the dragon's song, could sense the flow of cosmic energy that Mercury commanded. And through it all, his human mind provided the strategic framework that turned raw power into focused purpose. The Devourer raised both hands and summoned dark energy from across the star system. The attack that came at them could have destroyed a small moon. Jake and the dragons met it head-on. Silver fire erupted from Mercury's throat. But it wasn't just dragon flame. It was crystal dragon power guided by human tactical thinking and amplified by the baby dragon's pure emotional energy. The blast cut through the Devourer's attack like it was paper and struck the ancient entity directly. The Devourer screamed, and the sound shattered every piece of his technology in the chamber. The Dark Soldiers collapsed as their neural implants overloaded. The mechanical restraints throughout the facility sparked and died. But more importantly, the scream revealed something crucial about the Devourer. He wasn't an ancient cosmic entity at all. He was just another being who had gained power by stealing it from others. Without his technology and corrupted servants, he was vulnerable. "You want to know the difference between us?" Jake said, walking toward the stunned Devourer. "You take power by force. We share it by choice." The Devourer tried to stand, but Mercury placed one massive claw on his chest, pinning him down. "Your reign of terror ends here," the crystal dragon declared. "You cannot kill me," the Devourer gasped. "I am eternal." "We're not going to kill you," Jake said. "We're going to do something worse." Jake pulled out his comlink and transmitted on the Federation emergency frequency. "This is Jake Morrison, Colony 442B. I've got a priority prisoner for the Galactic Justice Council, someone who's committed genocide on about 50 different worlds. You might want to bring some big cages." The Devourer's eyes widened in true terror. "No, prison is a fate worse than death for one such as me. I require the life force of others to maintain my existence." "Yeah," Jake said unsympathetically. "I figured as much. Enjoy spending the next 1,000 years thinking about all the families you destroyed." As Federation troops swarmed the chamber, Jake finally allowed himself to relax. The baby dragons clustered around him, their scales bright with joy and relief. Mercury sat nearby, flexing his wings and marveling at his freedom. "So what happens now?" Silver asked through their mental link. "Now," Jake said, scratching behind Silver's small horns, "we make sure your parents and all the other captured creatures get home safely. Then I guess we figure out what a cowboy, 3 baby dragons, and a storm-calling uncle are supposed to do for an encore." Mercury's mental voice was warm with amusement. "I suspect, Jake Morrison, that the galaxy has not seen the last of our unlikely partnership." 3 weeks later, Jake was back to herding thorn beasts across the purple plains, but now he had help. Silver had turned out to have a natural talent for keeping the herd organized, while Spark and Shimmer enjoyed playing aerial scouts. Mercury had decided to stay on the colony world, serving as an informal ambassador between humans and the various dragon clans that were emerging from hiding across the galaxy. Sarah Chen's voice crackled through Jake's comlink as he watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that still took his breath away. "Jake, we just got word from the Justice Council. The Devourer's network has been completely dismantled. Thousands of species are being released from his collection facilities." "Good," Jake replied, watching Silver teach the young thorn beasts how to play a game that involved a lot of jumping and wing flapping. "How about his trial?" "Life imprisonment on every count. The judges said it was the most open and shut case of cosmic war crimes they'd ever seen. Oh, and Jake?" "Yeah? The Terran Federation wants to give you a medal. Something about extraordinary courage in the face of galactic-level threats." Jake tipped his hat back and grinned. "Tell them thanks, but no thanks. I've got everything I need right here." As the stars began to appear in the alien sky, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed. 3 months ago, he'd been a simple ranch hand on a frontier world. Now he was the unofficial protector of a family of crystal dragons and had somehow become the human who proved that cooperation could overcome any evil. Silver flew over and landed next to Jake's hoverbike. "What are you thinking about?" the young dragon asked. "Just wondering what tomorrow's going to bring," Jake replied. Silver's mental voice carried the wisdom of his ancient bloodline mixed with the excitement of youth. "With humans and dragons working together, Jake Morrison, I suspect tomorrow is going to be very interesting indeed." Jake looked at his unlikely family, 3 baby dragons who trusted him completely, and an ancient stormcaller who had become like a brother, and smiled. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, filled with bullies and tyrants who thought they could take whatever they wanted, but they had never faced the combination of human stubbornness and dragon loyalty. And Jake Morrison was looking forward to showing them exactly what they were up against. As the night settled over the frontier world, man and dragons sat together under an alien sky, planning adventures that would become legends across the galaxy. The universe had just learned a valuable lesson about what happened when you messed with Earth cowboys and their families. It was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget.